I've always loved our quiet little neighborhood, a perfectly manicured slice of Americana nestled in a corner of suburban Chicago. Each house held its own story, its own charm, its occupants adding to the colorful tapestry of our community. But that changed the day Mr. Herbert Singleton moved into the vacant house next door. Singleton was a man of indeterminate age, his lean figure draped in elegant clothing that seemed a decade out of date, his salt and pepper hair always neatly combed, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark, thick-rimmed glasses. He had the air of a person clinging to old habits, someone resistant to change. His arrival was marked by a sudden, palpable shift in the neighborhood's rhythm. It was as though a cloud had settled over our sunlit cul-de-sac, a cold wind blowing through the heart of our community. But I tried to shake off that feeling, attributing it to my own overactive imagination. The first time I met Singleton, he was in his front yard, fastidiously trimming his hedges. He turned to me, his lips curving into a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I remember the chill that ran down my spine, the way my heart fluttered in my chest. "Good morning, neighbor," he called out, his voice a smooth baritone that clashed with the icy glint in his eyes. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Sure is," I replied, forcing a smile onto my own face. We exchanged pleasantries, and I quickly retreated to the safety of my home, my skin crawling with an inexplicable unease. Days turned into weeks, and Singleton continued to be a consistent presence in our neighborhood. His routines were meticulous, his habits rigid. Every morning he'd sweep his porch, trim his hedges, and then retreat inside his house. He seldom left, and he never had any visitors. I began to notice odd occurrences. At night I'd hear strange noises from Singleton's house, unusual mechanical whirring and odd, muffled thumps. My dog, a usually jovial golden retriever named Max, started to act out of sorts, his tail dropping and his ears folding back every time he saw Singleton. And then there were the birds. Our neighborhood had always been a haven for various species, their songs filling the air with a constant, harmonious soundtrack. But since Singleton's arrival, they had grown quieter, and some had disappeared altogether. I voiced my concerns to my wife, Lisa, one night as we sat on our back porch, the lights from Singleton's house ominously piercing the darkness. "Isn't it a bit strange? The noises, the birds?" "Max's behavior?" I asked, my gaze fixed on Singleton's house. She chuckled, her hand gently squeezing mine. "Honey, you're letting your imagination run wild. He's just an old man living his life. Maybe he's a bit eccentric, but that's hardly a crime." Perhaps she was right, and I was overthinking things. One Saturday morning, a few weeks after our initial encounter, Singleton approached me as I was washing my car. He was carrying a pie, a classic apple one from the look of it, covered in a neat lattice crust. His smile was as cold as ever. "I thought I'd bring over a little housewarming gift," he said, offering the pie to me. "It's my grandmother's recipe." "Thanks, Herbert," I replied, accepting the pie. There was something about the way he watched me, the intensity in his gaze that set me on edge, but I brushed it off, reminding myself of Lisa's words. As the days slipped into weeks, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. I'd catch Singleton watching me from his window, his figure a silent specter against the dim light of his living room. Max continued to growl whenever he saw Singleton, his hackles raised and his eyes filled with a primal fear. Then, one night, I was awakened by a blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from Singleton's house. My heart pounded in my chest as I jumped out of bed, rushing to the window. There was no light in Singleton's house, no signs of any disturbance. Had I just imagined it? The next morning I approached Singleton, who was, as usual, trimming his hedges. "Heard a loud noise last night, Herbert. Everything okay?" His gaze met mine, a spark of something in his eyes that made me recoil inwardly. "Must have been a dream, neighbor," he said with a disconcerting grin. "I slept like a baby." But I knew what I had heard. It was real, a cry of pure terror that had shattered the tranquility of our neighborhood. And for some reason, I was certain that it had come from Singleton's house. The pit in my stomach deepened, the dread coiling tighter, my mind swirling with sinister possibilities. The facade of normalcy was slipping, revealing the chilling reality underneath. There was something terribly wrong with Mr. Herbert Singleton. In the following days, my curiosity turned into an obsession. I needed to know what was happening in Singleton's house, what secrets he was hiding. I started watching him more closely, taking note of his routines, his peculiar habits. I even started researching about him online, but found only scant information. Singleton was a ghost, a man without a past. One evening, as I was returning from a late-night walk with Max, I noticed Singleton's front door slightly ajar. This was unusual. He was obsessively careful about his privacy. I glanced around, seeing no sign of Singleton. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the house, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. "I'm just checking to make sure everything's okay," I reassured myself, reaching out to knock on the door. But before my knuckles could connect with the wood, the door creaked open further, revealing the dimly lit interior. "Hello?" I called out, peering inside. "Mr. Singleton?" There was no answer. I stepped inside, the silence of the house enveloping me. It was eerily quiet, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. The house was meticulously clean, the furniture draped in plastic covers. It felt sterile, devoid of any life. I moved further into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. A faint noise drew me towards the basement door. As I approached it, I could hear a soft, rhythmic thumping. My hand shook as I reached for the knob, the cold metal sending a shiver down my spine. But before I could turn it, Max's sharp bark echoed from outside, followed by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Panicked, I rushed out of the house, barely making it back to my own front porch before Singleton stepped out of his car. He locked eyes with me, his gaze cold and calculating. I forced a casual wave, which he returned before disappearing into his house. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had consumed me. I knew something was horribly wrong in Singleton's house. The rhythmic thumping, the scream from that night, Max's fear. Everything pointed to a disturbing truth that I was too afraid to confront. As sleep finally claimed me, I knew one thing for certain. I had to find out what Singleton was hiding, no matter the cost. I just hoped I was ready to face whatever horrors lay in wait. My mind was consumed by thoughts of Singleton and the mystery shrouding his house. I was careful around him, maintaining a casual demeanor while my suspicions grew deeper. Lisa began to notice my distant behavior, expressing her concern, but I dismissed it, not wanting to involve her in this macabre situation. One afternoon, while Singleton was out on one of his rare errands, I made my move. With Max by my side, I ventured into his house once again, the silence of the place pressing down on me. The rhythmic thumping guided me back to the basement door. I took a deep breath and turned the knob, the door creaking ominously as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit staircase. As I descended into the basement, the thumping grew louder, more insistent. My palms were sweaty, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached the bottom of the stairs. The sight that greeted me was nothing short of horrifying. The basement was a macabre shrine to a life unknown. Walls were covered with photographs of people, their faces marked with red crosses. In the center of the room, a large mechanical contraption thumped rhythmically, the source of the unsettling noise. But what made my blood run cold was the large cage in the corner of the room. It was empty, but it was clear it had been used. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized the gravity of what I was witnessing. My mind raced, trying to piece together the chilling evidence before me. The scream, the photographs, the cage, it all pointed to a horrifying truth about Singleton's true nature. Just then, I heard the front door creak open. My heart hammered against my chest as I rushed back up the stairs, barely making it out of the house before Singleton stepped inside. I hurried back to my own home, the horrific images from the basement seared into my mind. That night, I lay awake, my mind reeling with the implications of my discovery. I knew I had to act, to expose Singleton for what he truly was. But how? How could I prove the atrocities that were hidden beneath the veneer of normalcy? As I grappled with these questions, I realized that my peaceful suburban life had been shattered, replaced by a chilling reality I was struggling to comprehend. My quiet little neighborhood had become a stage for a sinister play, and I was cast in a role I never auditioned for, a witness to the hidden evil living next door. The line between everyday normalcy and the macabre had blurred, forever tainting my perception of the world around me. For the real horror wasn't in the gruesome discovery, but in the realization that evil could be so deceptively ordinary, hiding in plain sight.